using rational argument. Very difficult for this person to understand what is the Maya, what is the nature, how do we get to know him, what are his criteria, yeah, what are his qualities, and how do we know these qualities. And of course, for Muslims, uh, we accept the sources of knowledge, yeah, for us to know things from the Quran and from the Hadith of the Prophet. This is also another criteria or tools for ascertaining or for getting to the certainty of knowledge in Islam. That Quran and Sunnah is vital for us to acquire knowledge. Now, if this is also rejected, then the discourse between a Muslim and whoever is engaging with a Muslim would be very impossible. Yeah. So that therefore, during the time of the companions, tabi'in, and also during the time of the Muslim reformists, they tried very hard. They tried very hard to prove Allah, yeah? To prove Allah, to prove prophets, to prove angels via rational argumentation, empirical evidences to convince those who were interested to engage in intellectual discourse with the Muslim to understand the faith of Muslim. So we know that in Islam, shirk is the most grave sin, yeah? The sin that Allah um, will not forgive. And this is the first principle in understanding him, that he does not have associates. Hence the word tawhid. He is alone in his qualities, attributes, and characters. Yeah. And then I remember in the last meeting also I said that even though he belongs to the metaphysical world, to alamul ghaib, but he make it possible for all of us to get to know him using our rational inquiries, yeah, using the things around us which he regard as ayat, as dalil. Yeah? Ayat means when evidences of his presence, yeah, of his greatness, of his mightness. Yeah. So in the Quran, he helped us to insight our rational inquiry, rational understanding in order to understand his ontology. Of course, he used the words that are familiar to us, that he has faces, he sit down on his throne, and he watches, he listens. Why he use all these words that are familiar to us? Because he want to explain about himself, his ontology. Can we imagine that he explains about himself using the words that is not understandable by us? If he use, say, the language of the UFO, for example, yeah, maybe we can utter it, but we will not be able to comprehend and understand what he means. But as a matter of fact, he used the language that is understandable. You know, he has eyes, but then his eyes is different from our eyes, because he established in a number of places in the Quran that he is laisa kamithlihi shay. I am not like the creations. I am not like my creation. Yeah. So he exerts his singleness or his oneness in this respect. And because of that, our ulama, our scholars develop this discourse on his rububiyah, uluhiyah, yeah, al-asma wa as-sifat, mainly to explain who is God. And of course, we know that knowing God is fardu ain. In Islam, knowing God is fardu ain. It's it's fardu ain means that it is compulsory to every single individual Muslim. So it is not an optional subject that uh, you can take whether you like it or you do not like it. But if you are a Muslim parents, then it's your obligation to get your children to be taught or to know or to learn fardu ain. Yeah. And then now, in order to explain his attributes, to explain God further, our ulama has tried very much to explain his attributes using categorization or classification. So for those of you who have had the opportunity to learn, Aqidah or Tawhid, the concept of Tawhid in a very subtle manner, maybe these terms are not foreign to you. For example, when I speak about his sifat nafsiyah, sifat zatiyah, sifat salbiyah, sifat ma'ani or thubutiyah, sifat ma'nawiyah. Let me give very brief example because if we want to discuss his attributes, it will take us maybe another class. Yeah. So sifat zatiyah refers to his a number of qualities, his wujud, his existence. So this is very essential attributes, built-in attributes. Baqa, wahdaniyah, qiyamuhu binafsihi, mukhalafatuhu lil hawadis. This is sifatu zatiyah that explain his essential or his essence. I would say his essence. Yeah. And then we have also sifat salbiyah. Sifat salbiyah, what is sifat salbiyah? Sifat salbiyah that deny the otherwise. Deny the otherwise. So sifat, for example, he is qidam, he is there from the very beginning, eternal. So this counter the argument who said that he is he has how do you call it, he is mortal. He is mortal. As a matter of fact, he is immortal in the sense that he has been there, he will be at present, he will be in future. So he is not, but in the discussion of the philosopher and kalam, he is beyond history. This is very interesting discourse. He is beyond history. He is beyond time and space. When you talk about creations, when you talk about makhluk, you talk about the entity that has beginning and has ends. But God is beyond time and beyond space. Yeah. So this is I'm giving you an example of one of his attributes or qualities, which is qidam. So of course, our ulama discuss every single entity, every single quality. Why? Because they want to introduce him, via his qualities, via his attributes. So we know him for sure, because bear in mind that they are religions with no description whatsoever about God, about who God is. As a matter of fact, it is very impossible to know, because he is too far and above. He is too transcendent that no words can explain him. Not even a single, not even a word that is compatible to pronounce to explain him. So how do we relate ourselves to this kind of God who has no criteria whatsoever? Yeah. And they are also religions with hundred thousands of descriptions about him, uh, and features. You can have his features, as a matter of fact. So yeah, he has power, and in order to understand him as power, then you have gods with, for example, many hands. Yeah, God that can be in the body of someone else, because he can come down to this earth and physically relate with man, and he can become man, and he can also do something that is from the perspective of a Muslim, impossible or strange for God to do. For example, God can commit incest. So the Quran speaks about God and explain and deny things that are not compatible to Him. And this is the way we know Him. Of course, if we read the Quran and take this meaning in a very literal sense, then we will encounter some confusion lah. And our ulama helps. Then we need to go to the discourse to understand, to know to how to rid of our confusion. So what I would like to stress here is that some people say, "Allah, why all this discourse and very complex?" Some people may be contented with a literal understanding of these words, so they may subscribe to the view of Hanabila or Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who is satisfied with the literal meaning of God, of the qualities of God. So, for example, He sit down on the throne. Yes, He sit down, and that's it. So you don't go beyond interpreting what sit is all about. He is sitting. He sits. Just don't think about it. So you know that He sits, and that's it. But there are also people who wants to go beyond, who wants to know, well, sit in what manner? Is He sitting like us? Is He have the body like us that enable Him to sit? He sits on His throne. What kind of throne? How does that throne look like? So our monkey mind is very naughty, and some people had to quench the thirst of this monkey mind. So our ulama entertain this question as well and explain. So they either they do ta'wil, or either they interpret, or either they say, well, it is sitting, but you cannot go beyond bila kaifa, you do not know how, because He is different from human. So if you think about how animals sit, humans sit, just know that He sits, but you cannot imagine the way He is sitting, because He is unlike creation. All this we're trying to explain to us the metaphysics. And of course, in the course of this intellectual, we know that our usuliyun or our ulama were divided into a number of groups. So I put here on this anthropomorphism, the things that I've explained just now is about the verses of the Quran that explain God has limbs. Has limbs like human being. So some ulama wants to understand it at the literal meaning. Some wants to interpret it. Some wants to interpret very far away. Do ta'wil, interpret very far away from the real meaning. There were also ulama of such, and there were also ulama who incline into interpret it, but helps the Muslims to understand that even though we interpret it, we better be cautious that He is unlike the creations, regardless how you interpret Him, but just make sure that you do not associate Him with the creations. Now, these are all rational exercises. Whether we subscribe to the literal ke, whether we subscribe to the ta'wil ke, these are all range of ideas, range of interpretations given by our ulama to help us to understand Him. This should be accepted in a positive manner, in the sense that Muslims want to know his or their God. So that metaphysics, alam al-ghaib, despite its being foreign from us, is not dogmatic. It's not something that you cannot think about. It's not something that you cannot rationalize. It's not something that you cannot understand using empirical evidences. This is what I'm trying to say. So I know that even when I learned Usuluddin during school time, secondary school and then at the university, sometimes we could not appreciate why our ulama have different ideas about God. Why they counter debate into each other. Sometimes led into very grave dissensions. But after some time, I now understand why these differences occur. In the first place, because Muslims wants to know God better. And if you compare this, Usuluddin or the theological disputes or scholastic theology in that time with modern discourse, you will appreciate how these differences help you to understand God. Because in the modern discourse of God, man no longer study God. Man no longer study God to understand God, but man study man to know God. And God is regarded as human projection, human experience. It's either human projection, human mind projection, or human experience per se. So that's why Nietzsche say God is dead. You know why? Because God, in its original discourse about him, is um, no longer relevant. But it's all merely about how human interpret it, how human experience it. Thanks to William James the variety of religious experience that God, divinity, religion are merely human experience. So it has nothing to do with metaphysics whatsoever. And of course you can find here the discourse on Kalamullah, Ru'yatullah. I'm going to continue this today. So let's go to the next principle, angels. Why the Quran? Why the ulama discuss about angels? Because angels also belong to this physical world, and it is important to differentiate between angels and God, between angels and man, and between angels and other creations. So we do not confuse between angels and God, because there are religions who seem to equate between angels and God. So that's why our ulama explain who are the angels. And the Quran, mashallah, the Quran also explain about their roles. And in the context of classical theology, angels were most of the time discussed in the context of eschatology. Eschatology in the sense that eschatology means the end of the world, after this world. Yaumul akhirah lah. And some also relates about the cosmology, especially in terms of the creation of the world. You know how the conversation between Malaikah and Allah, when Allah wanted to create man, when Allah creates Adam alayhi salam and Eve. So there was also story about Malaikah. So but the discourse of Malaikah, was to help man to differentiate between Allah and Malaikah, and to explain the role of Malaikah. Significantly, this helps to us to understand about what would be our destiny or our context in the hereafter. Alright, and then wahyu. This is also significant because wahyu is one of the important component in Islam that is not regarded by, especially by the modern scholarship. But in the classical discourse about Aqidah, wahyu is regarded as fundamentals of Iman. Fundamentals of Iman, or discourse in the context of the fundamentals of Iman. Because if someone has problem with wahyu, then someone will have not only problems with Allah or with the angels, but also with accepting the Quran, accepting the Hadith as source of knowledge. And while explaining this, the ulama also had to explain the Quran as mu'jizah. Of course, this is in addition to the other revealed scriptures lah, Taurah, Injil, Zabur, and Suhuf. Why it is significant to relate the scriptures with the scripture before the Quran? Because of the essential criteria of the concept of Tawheed, that all prophets were believers of Tawheed. That Tawheed is not the new teaching of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it was the teaching of Prophet Adam alaihi salam, Prophet Idris, Prophet Nuh, Prophet Musa, Prophet Yaqub, so on and so forth. Yeah. So and of course these prophets were given revelation too. So that's why in the Quran many times the Quran confront the Jews and the Christians, the Nasara and Al-Yahud. Why? Because when they denied the Quran, God asked them, were you not told before that there were scriptures? So this is not something new to you. Now that we send the scriptures, we reveal the words to Prophet Muhammad SAW, why is it so difficult for you to understand? I mean, if the pagan Arab could not comprehend revelation or scripture, then it is quite understandable, because it took very long time after Prophet Isa alaihi salam to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Prophet Isa alaihi salam perhaps approximately 30 BCE and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam 571 CE. Sorry, 30 CE and Prophet Muhammad 571 CE, and then he received revelation in 40 years after that. Yes, 611. So, well, 600 years maybe the pagan Arab, even though the pagan Arab from the historical timeline have heard of revelation since the time of Prophet Ibrahim alaihi salam, but that was a very long gap. They may not be familiar with what Al-Wahyu is all about. But the Christians and the Jews, they were revealed with series of scriptures. Yeah. So why is it so difficult for them to accept it when Prophet Muhammad said that I was given the revelation? And in line with the revelation, then we have the prophets, as I told you, explained just now, that the concept of Tawhid also covers all the prophets before Prophet Muhammad SAW. So it's not the message of Prophet Muhammad SAW alone, but the message of all the prophets. Yeah. So, in principle, there shouldn't be a problem for someone who believe in Prophet Musa alaihi salam, in Prophet Isa alaihi salam, in Prophet who else? Moses, Jesus. Can you help to recall the prophets of the Christians and the prophets of the Jews in the Bible? Yeah? So, in principle, shouldn't be any problems for them to accept Prophet Muhammad SAW, because they've been given Isaac, Jacob. All these prophets were familiar to them, narrated and explained plainly clear in the Bible. Yeah. All right. So the discourse in Aqidah about the prophets is about their prophethood, their infallibility, al-ismah. Yeah, maksum. Yeah, maksum means they are prevented from committing big sin. Yeah, that the prophets, people protected from committing big sin, but they are human beings. Also, the nature of the prophet, because prophets are not, supernatural character like what we saw in the movie today. Can the I don't know this movie lah. But our prophet just like man, just like ordinary man, but he is given value added quality that can be the prophet. Yeah, and also when discussing about the prophet, the ulama also discuss about syafa'ah, getting his help in the hereafter, in Yaumul Akhirah, and also the differences between syafa'ah and tawassul, and most importantly mu'jizah, because mu'jizah actually is a thought-provoking phenomenon for the modern scientists. Yeah, for the modern scientists, they want to understand how mu'jizah happen. Yeah, and therefore, if you read Hume, David Hume, how he also get into the discourse of Al-Ghazali about the theory of mu'jizah, cause and effect, and he seemed to buy that idea. He seemed to subscribe to this theory of cause and effect, but he take it at the level of rationality alone. And then, of course, the question of al-qada or al-qadar, yeah, predestination and free will, free will and predestination. Why is this important in the context of Iman? Yeah, in the context of Aqidah, because this is to tell human or to give us the understanding that as creation, we have limitation. We have limitation, and the one that created us knows better about us. Yeah, so we are not God. We are not God in that sense, because there are things that we can happen when we do, but there are things that cannot happen when we do it or when we commit it, because there is a supernatural power that make things happen for us. Yeah, and when we understand this dimension, we know that this power is greater than us. So we are not the God, yeah, and we are His creation, and we are subject to His destiny. So that make Him great. That make Him great. Yeah? So this is the line of submission as creation that is needed. Because I remember one of my research, I had the opportunity to interview a Muslim who apostate. She was formerly a non-Muslim, and then she married a Muslim man, and when they divorced, she decided to leave Islam. So I want to know to what extent that she understand Islam, and why she wants to leave Islam. And then from the conversation, I know that this line of submission is not there, because she said that she knows what is good and what is not good for her. She does not need God or religion, for that matter, to tell her what to do and what not to do. So the line of submission is not there. Now, if the line of submission is not there, then we will not be able to accept him as someone who knows better of our destiny, someone who plans better for our destiny. Yeah. So this is the metaphysical aspect of the predestination and freedom. Yeah? I hope I can deliberate on this, but of course the major school in this debate were the predestinarians, the group that thinks that God decided everything for mankind, yeah, and you have no hold of it. So just the Hanabila said that you just like a fur in the air, wherever the wind blow you, there you go. Yeah. Hanabila were very literalist in this sense, because they want to safeguard the omnipotence of God, the greatness of God. They were the earlier Muslims. Yeah? They were the kind of people who would say, Sami'na wa ata'na. Yeah? So they have less questions. They accept the Quran literally because they have less questions. They were very obedient people. But then they were libertarians. Yeah, who are the libertarians? The libertarians who want to know why things like this, why things like that, and the libertarians engage with people of other religions that question the Muslim. So they were in the position to explain to the non-Muslims and to convince themselves. So they question why God do this, why God do that. How do we understand the actions of man? How do we understand the actions of God? Why God determined this? Is there any way that when God determines something, that it can be changed? If it is changed, is it new, or is it have been changed a long time ago? Does His knowledge just knew, or it is some time ago. Like for example, after this, I decided to take good nasi lemak, for example. Yeah, I just think about nasi lemak at this point of time. But does God know that I have this, thinking suddenly spark when I am delivering lecture? Oh, He knows from the very beginning. Selina will be talking about that she wants to take nasi lemak after this. Now, if He knows this instantly, does this mean that His knowledge is new? Now, if His knowledge is new, it means that He has no power, no knowledge whatsoever about human destiny. So the ulama had to you know had to deal with all these questions. And mashallah, whether we agree or disagree with them, those were ijtihad, and I suggest that we appreciate them for their ijtihad. Yeah. I hope that's how we understand these disputes among our ulama, because if we are able to understand the disputes in the past, we are able to understand the disputes today. Because what I can see that today's disputes, we are prone to accuse and blasphemous each other, which is very negative lah, in terms of Muslim Brotherhood as concerned, in terms of knowledge acquisition is concerned. Yeah? And then of course yaumul bi'athah, the hereafter. Ulama had to explain the hereafter, because the hereafter dictated how we live here in this world, how we relate ourselves with God, how do we relate ourselves with the wahyu, how do we relate ourselves with the prophet, in what manner that we want the prophet to help us. Yeah, so these are all interrelated concepts. Yeah, of course the Quranic proof and evidences, the chronology, and this has to be explained, because at least at that point of time, Muslims scholars had to explain, had to counter the debate from the Christians and the Jews especially lah, because the Christian and the Jews also have their eschatological ideas or view or doctrine. Yeah, so they have also resurrection, they have also kind of heaven and hell. So how do we differentiate? Yeah, so Muslim scholars had to explain. So now I'm stop sharing this one. I'm sorry, I'm taking much time to explain the last thing. Let me look. Okay, so I have like 10-15 minutes to discuss this with slides. Yeah, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about Tawheed. Yeah, so let's take a look at what Tawheed is. I'm going to give a very in addition to the classical expositions, I'm going to also share with you the modern discourse on Tawheed, whether it is possible or not, because I keep on saying that, modern discourse disqualify revelation, and there is no way that you can understand God from and religion in a genuine sense if you look at the modern discourse. But alhamdulillah, some Muslim scholars have managed to benefit from the modern discourse, reconcile, and help the Muslims to understand further in the context of current time. Yeah? And of course, we benefit from the classical inputs. Yeah? So we want to relate what we have learned in the past as well as what we are exposed with in current time. So let's take a look at what Tawheed is. Of course, the very basic meaning. Yeah, whenever I ask my students, what do you understand from the word Tawheed? And they say, well, God is one, God is single, and there is no God other than Him. Yeah, so alhamdulillah lah, if they add there is no God after other than Him. Yeah, but if they say God is one, then I start to confront them. So, well, in Christianity they also believe that God is one. Judaism also believe that God is one. Even Hinduism also believe that God is one. Monism, in the context of monism, and they also believe that this God is transcendent. Yeah, is the concept of Atman, the concept of higher soul. Yeah, the concept of Sanatana Dharma. So, what type of Tawheed are you talking about? Yeah, so this is one of the interesting development when we discuss the concept of Tawheed in the context of modern time. We have also to be able to compare the concept of Tawhid to that of other religions. And I would like also to add here that um, today we talk about comparative religion, right? And we look at comparative religion as a discipline emerged in the Western discourse, modern discourse. As a matter of fact, comparative religion in the Islamic intellectual tradition stem or started off in Aqidah or in ilmul kalam, especially in ilmul kalam, because when the Muslim scholars explain Islam, Muslim scholars also compare it with the teaching or with the belief of other religions in order to reinforce the meaning of Islam. Yeah. So in the past, Muslims did not develop comparative religion as comparative religion, but it is more of the study of belief system. Ilmu al-milal wa al-nihal. Yeah. All right. So not what is Tawhid as a discipline. This is when the concept of Tawhid has developed as a discipline, a systematic study. It is the science, hold on. It is the science, why is it like this? I cannot see the slide. It is the science that studies the being and attributes of God, the essential and the possible affirmations about Him, as well as the negations that are necessary to make relating to Him. So, and it is a classical outlook. It is a discipline that explain about God. Yeah? But it is very interesting, even when I've explained to you the dimensions of Iman just now, you know that it's not all about God, but it is about how His makhluk relates to Him. What are the tools that He used to make this relation possible? So Tawhid, later on developed not only into understanding of God, but also the understanding of how man relates to God, how nature relates to God. Yeah. So now this science developed into a more complex and sophisticated. That's the better word. As sophisticated is known as theology. Well, theology is more compatible to Christianity lah. And it started off with the emergence of sectarianism. Yeah. And then now, okay. Theology is scholastic theology, kalam. I missed this point. Yeah, theology and then scholastic theology or kalam. Yeah, sometimes it is known as systematic theology. So when Muslims develop, Muslims, Christians, and the Jews lah, we have also to appreciate the contributions of the Jews and the Christian in this intellectual discourse, without which then I believe that Muslims will not be able to develop a better understanding about God. So the hikmah of countering or debating with the Christians, with the Jews, is that we get to know God better. So don't worry if your children or your students want to learn comparative religion, because the more they learn about other religions, the better they know about Islam. Yeah, inshallah. Yeah. So it is claimed that the Islamic theology started off. Okay, how did this discourse develop? Well, whether we like it or not, the rift between Sadina Ali and Maawiyah has given the foundation of these different ways of understanding the doctrines, different way, most importantly, different way of understanding and interpreting the verses of the Quran. Yeah, and the tools that they use to get into the understanding of the Quran and the Hadith. Yeah, and of course, I think in the Islamic intellectual tradition, it is very important to understand the role of the muhaddithun. The role of muhaddithun, because in my understanding that the sciences disciplines in Islam, like fiqh, even Usuluddin has also what do you call it? Has also its root in the study of the hadith. in the study of the hadith. Because we know that the science of the Quran developed first, and then the science of the hadith developed after the sciences of the Quran, and the muhadithun helped to develop also fiqh. And then because of the verses of the Quran, the verses of and the hadith, there's a lot with questions on aqidah, then the discourse benefit from the discussions or from the discourse. Alright, so let's take a look at this rift between Sadina Ali and Maawiyah. This has led into sectarian, and the sectarians to a certain extent they hold different ideas about certain things in the understanding of Islam. So from the very first we have the Shia, the Khawarij and the Murji'ah. So very quick, so Shia because of frustration to Muawiyah and because of obsession to Sayyidina Ali. They believe that Sayyidina Ali is supposed to be an extreme idea. Sayyidina Ali is supposed to be the next Khalifa after the demise of Prophet Muhammad SAW, and that it's important to have Imam as instead of Khalifa, as the leaders of the Muslim after the death of the Prophet. But unfortunately, there was no Imam, and the Khalifa, in their opinion, has created lots of chaos in the Muslim leadership. So that have made them into another group disassociated from the mainstream of that time. And then we have also the Khawarij. The Khawarij also at first were the followers, the supporters of Sayyidina Ali, but disagree on certain things that have been attempted by the followers of Sayyidina Ali, and that has led into the problem into the Majlis Tahkim, that Ali did not become the Khalifa because of some mistake, confusion done by the followers of Sayyidina Ali. So they parted. And they have very strong literal understanding about the verses of the Quran. To them, Muslims cannot commit any single sin, even minor sin, because if you commit minor sin, then you are liable to go to nar. So what is nar? Okay, and then the Murji'ah, between these two conflicts, then the Murji'ah disassociate themselves. They don't want to get involved into all these disputes, and they can, we suspend the judgment. So they are neither the Shia, they were neither the Shia nor the Khawarij. They postponed it into the Shia after. Let's got decide about. So this has led into dissensions and rift among the Muslims, and because of that has significantly influenced their view about Islam. And this is unavoidable. The Prophet was not there. And then the second theological dispute, this escalates later. The question of predestination. This was the first the very big theological dispute among the Muslim scholars. About understanding the action of man. So the Qadariyah in this respect perceive that man is predestined. Man cannot do anything. If God has destined as such, and that's it. This is the view of Hanabilah, the literalists. But then the Qadariyah contest or challenge this idea. The Qadariyah believe that man is free. Man is the creator of his action. I think this is where the problem lies, because the Qadariyah says that man is the actor of his creation, whereas the Hanabilah believe that God create the action of man. The Qadariyah later on developed their discourse, and they were more prominent as Mu'tazilah because of certain leaders among them, Wasil ibn Atta, who disassociate himself from his teacher Hasan al-Basri, and they have very pertinent principles that they've discussed, that all together develop the discourse in kalam lah. So these are the 5 principles: God unity, God's justice, the intermediate position, manzilatun baina manzilataini, reward and punishment, and then al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahi anil munkar. Now, why these 5 principles are important to be highlighted? Because Muslims discourse on theology were mainly based on this. It's a dialectical. So this is what I want to say about the nature of Islamic theology during that time. Is dialectical, whether you like it or not, whether you agree or disagree. This was the situation at that point of time. Muslims were allowed to question, to understand, to get more explanations, to get involved into rational debates. But if you're not into this rational debate, I can respect for your opinion. But this was how this is how it was in the past. Yeah. So Muslims explain, the Mu'tazilah explain. The Muslims call themselves as Ahlul Adli wa Tawheed. What is Ahlul Adli wa Tawheed? Because they want to defend the justice of God and they want to defend the unity of God. But one interesting criteria about the Mu'tazilites were that in contradiction to the Hanabalites, was so literalist. Yeah, but the Mu'tazilites were very receptive to rational demonstration. They were the group that read or get exposed with the Greek, especially later Mu'tazilah, Greek philosophy, and they were kind of obsessed into rational argumentation, logical argumentation, and they adopt this method in the understanding of Islamic Aqidah. Yeah. So whether you have some appreciation or you disagree with the Mu'tazilah is secondary. But what I'm trying to say here, because of the Mu'tazilah, kalam was there, and we had very sophisticated and complex discourse lah about the question of God's unity, the questions about God attributes, to the extent that whether we have this dispute over the Quran, because Muslims have disputes over the Quran because the Quran is the words of God. Now, whether the words of God is part of God or whether it is separated from God. If it is part of God, then is it God? If it is not part from God, then also whether it is God or not God. So the question of the Quran, whether it is makhluk or it is God, and that has also influenced the states, the state ideology. So, and that has brought the rift between Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal with Khalif al-Ma'mun, and maybe you are familiar that in history that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was put into jail. Okay, I will start at this point, but I would like also to address something about why Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was jailed. Maybe we understand jail in the context of today, but I believe that he was jailed not in a very in a dungeon like jail, but he was locked because the Khalif did not want him to continue to disseminate his discourse, especially his understanding of anthropomorphic verses, that is inclined into Tajasim, because of the emergence of the group who is more inclined into Tajasim, saying that God has limbs like creation, and the Khalifa, fear that the Muslims will fall into polytheism. Yeah, so I will stop at that point. Inshallah, I will continue a bit more next week. And thank you very much. I'm so sorry I can see hands put up, but I really cannot address your question. Please give your question to the organizers. So inshallah, next week I'll be able to, in my very little capacity, to address them. Over to you, Dato'. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.